You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network. Today, hanging out with a gentleman that I met, I think it was 2 years ago, J.C. Campbell, and just had an incredible first meeting with him. I think our hearts were knit together immediately when we first started talking. And so today I wanted to have JC on just to talk about, his life a little bit, and then about what he is seeing, experiencing as he's doing some things in ministry to help other churches. And so you guys, I think, are really going to enjoy this podcast conversation because he's a cool dude. And he's coming to us currently from his high-rise suite in New York. Not really. If you're watching the YouTube, you understand why I said that.
Yeah. Keep pumping me up, Dale.
Yeah, JC, how are you doing, man?
I am fantastic. Thank you, Dale. This is a true honor. I really appreciate it. I'm excited. I'm excited, ready to rock and roll. And so again, thank you so much. I really do appreciate this.
Well, take a few moments and just kind of let everybody know your story. Where do you live? You're in Indiana, I believe.
Yes, so I currently reside in Evansville, Indiana. I
Okay.
serve bivocationally as the senior pastor of Greater Hope Church here in Evansville, and also work as the Southwest Regional Director for the Center for Congregations, which is an Eli Lilly Endowment organization. And
Hmm.
what I do is I service about 16 counties in the southwestern part of the state of Indiana for resource consulting, education and professional development, and grant making. We help churches to ensure that projects and ministry and things that they do are supported with finances through the Lilly Endowment. And so I've been doing that for about a year and a half now, and it has been absolutely fantastic. And prior to that, of course, I've been in ministry for a number of years, and I've always been bivocational. So prior to going into the Lilly Endowment Center for Congregations, I also worked in higher education. I've served as a vice president at an institution, and I've been a fundraiser and a philanthropist and all those things. And so have a great wealth of experience by the grace and glory of God. And so yeah, keep myself busy.
How in the world could someone who's only 20 years old have done all the stuff you've done?
Well, I wish I were still 20 sometimes. I will be 37 in November.
Hmm.
And I have to admit to you that I'm a middle child.
Uh,
And so I've always had the middle child syndrome. And I've always been a person that is about business and doing it well. And
uh-huh.
so at a very early age, I'd made up in my mind that I am just going to focus and hit the ground and continue to do all the things that I need to do to be a success in life and to give glory to God. And so I don't attribute any of what I've done to, I'm just the greatest person in the world because, I haven't always been, but I attribute it to just hard work, ethics, wisdom, listening to people that will pour into you.
Yeah.
And so God's not through with me yet.
Did you grow up in Indiana?
No, I am
Yeah.
born and raised in the Derby City, Louisville, Kentucky.
Really?
I always find it funny when people say, "Oh, you're from Louisville," and I say, "Well, technically, yes, but if you're from there, it's always Louisville."
It's
No one
Louisville.
ever
Yeah.
says,
I mean, anybody
"Yeah,
around the
it's
South
Louisville."
knows it's
Yeah,
Louisville.
yeah, it's Louisville, right? And technically, I always tell people, yes, we are Louisville because we're named after King Louis the 16th of France. So it is Louisville, but
Yeah.
everyone from there is Louisville. So I had a great upbringing in Louisville, Kentucky, and still visit frequently because
Were
most
you
of
in
my
the church when you
family.
grew up?
Oh yeah, I mean, as early as I can remember, I've
Your
always been in
family?
church.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I taught. I kind of went between two churches. My parents got divorced when I was in middle school, and so my mother and her family were members of a historic African American church in Louisville called Lambton
Hmm.
Baptist Church. It actually was the first mega church, large church in the state of Kentucky. And they
Really?
had about 4,000 members in the 50s. And so
Wow.
they
Wow.
were a fantastic institution. And then my father's side was a part of another historic African American church called First Gethsemane, affectionately known as First G in Louisville, Kentucky. So as far as I can remember, I've always grew up in the church.
We have an African American church in our area, and it's the word is spelled generosity, but they call it
Hmm?
generosity because
Okay.
it's been around for a long, long time, and it's still a
Oh,
very well established church. What are you seeing as far as African American churches go with being up to date, if you will, as far as reaching the next generation? Because I have worked with several churches that are they're trying to make this transition from just doing things the way they've always done them
mhm.
to try to really update some, and it's not working really well. What are you seeing?
I think, Dale, I'll give you some positives and I'll give you some negatives.
Okay, good.
So for me, the positive things that I've seen is the actual integration of youth and young adults within church life.
Good.
I grew up believing that, oh, that's a separate ministry. You all do your own thing. And there are times where you need that. But
Mm-hmm.
I also think to see young adults, college age students,
Mm-hmm.
the 20s to 30s, being actively involved on the deacons board, being actively engaged with search committees, being actively engaged on the board of trustees and in leadership and in administration. That is very helpful for I think the growth and development of the church and to get that experience for our young people. At
Mm-hmm.
my church, our children's ministry, which we call our angel ministry, is the largest ministry at our church. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they are rocking, right? And we have decided rather than build ministries that we just build because we've always had them, but
Mm-hmm.
we have supportive measures for the ministries that are fruitful and growing. So I've seen this a lot more with a lot of my colleagues and their churches engaging those generations. I think the challenge that I've seen, and I said a negative, but it can turn into a negative, but it's really a challenge,
Mm-hmm.
is finding leaders that can lead that demographic.
Okay,
Finding
dive
individuals.
into that. Dive into
Yeah,
that.
so having a space for young adults and college students
Mm-hmm.
that does not conform to what the ministry thinks it should conform,
Got you.
but allowing that group to inform them about, hey, this is what we need. So don't build a small group if they don't want a small group.
Mm-hmm.
Don't build this program if they don't need to build a program. Maybe those students say, hey, we don't have a space on campus that we can study in peace. And your church is right around the corner from our campus. Can you just make a space for us where we can come on the weekends and just study with a little coffee shop area
Mm-hmm.
and some snacks? Like I think oftentimes we put in our minds, Dale, oh, I'm confident I know what they need. And if we don't talk to them about what they need, that's where I think the true challenge comes from. I think if you were to look at the demographic of churches across our country, the challenge with connecting to youth and young adults is we think they know what we think we know what they need without asking them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is we put leadership in place that is not centered or connected. And what I'm trying to say to all our podcast listeners is I'm trying to use a nice way to say we put leadership in that's too old and can't connect, or we put people in there that's too young and they're inexperienced and they
Uh-huh.
too close. They're too
Uh-huh.
connected to the demographic without being seen as a leadership figure. So not just throwing people in there because, oh, we got a warm body, go lead this ministry, but
Mm-hmm.
no. And I mean no disrespect when I say this.
Sure.
I tell you this. When I was growing up, my youth minister was the same person that was the children's minister for my children. I want that to sink in.
So anyway, say that again now.
Okay, so the minister of youth and children, when
Mm-hmm.
I was a child, was the same person when my children were entering the ministry.
Wow.
That's not healthy. I'm sorry. I'm not an ageist by any means.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, but I think we have to be thinking of those things. Like we have to be thinking of who really is going to do a good job at this, whose
Mm-hmm.
heart is for this ministry, and are we speaking and listening to the demographic that we're going to serve?
One of the things that we do when we do a vision day, which is our thing that we do, we come and work with an individual church to help them get
Mhm.
on point with mission and vision and things. One of the things we talk about is who's the primary demographic you're trying to reach. And typically it's young families, 25 to 40, 45 with kids, either unchurched or de-churched, which just means they used
Yeah,
to go and don't go anymore. And,
yeah.
and so once we pick that demographic, then we do the next chart we talk about is what do they value? And I have
Mhm.
to qualify this and go, okay, now this is not what we want them to value.
Yeah.
which is, I don't really see this as much in any other arena that I can think of as I do in the church, where we try to tell people what they should value.
Yep.
And again, maybe some of the things they value aren't what aren't godly or right or churchy, but they still what they value. And if you're going to reach them, you got to understand what they value to reach them. And I feel like that's kind of what you're saying there. You've got to put leadership in place who understands what the demographic you're focusing on values. Is that what you're kind of seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge, again, back to your point, is you cannot project what you feel
Hmm.
a family or a youth or a college student is going to care about or value, as you said. You have to come in and say, hey, listen, right now, we don't want to push the parents into taking a leadership role, but I know that they're really concerned about children's church. I'm going to tell you right now, and this is to toot our own horn because I think our church is amazing. We have a lot of areas of growth, but I think we're doing
Hmm.
wonderful because we think about these things.
Okay.
So, because we're getting a lot of young families. And one Sunday we didn't have children's church, which we call Angel Hour.
Hmm.
And we have that every Sunday down in the lower level of the church while we're having worship in the sanctuary.
Hmm.
We didn't have it. It was for a good reason. I can't really remember. Do you know about 50 kids stormed my office after church saying, hey,
Hey,
like,
where's our church
where's
service?
where's our snacks? Where's our lesson? Where are our instructors? Where are the songs we're going to learn? Like, it was serious. And so then the next week I got emails from parents like, hey, Pastor, I know, you didn't mean anything by it, but our kids are really upset that there was no angel hour. Like those things matter.
Yes.
And no, it may not, the angel hour may not look like the main service. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to look that way because we have people in place that are trained, that are passionate about it, that have young children, understand raising young children and teaching young children. We have retired teachers in our ministry. We have current teachers in our ministry. And so, asking questions of young people like, what do you want to learn about the Bible? And what activities do you think would help you understand the Bible better? And cultivating it that way. So, one of the questions we ask when we have new members is, what do you value? What if you could pick three things that are important to you about a church, what is it? So
Mhm.
that is exactly what I'm saying.
That is so good. There's this tension, and it's strange to me that I think the tension's becoming greater than instead of diminishing. Where for in my era when we grew up, we didn't have children's church. We went to church and we sat in the main service, and my whole objective of getting through that service was not to get pinched by dad or getting threatened with a whipping when you get out of church for cutting up. But it was boring. We didn't understand it. So, at some point, I don't know if it was in the 70s or somewhere, there became this emphasis on creating a service to teach children on their level.
Yeah.
But there's also this big push now where it's like more churches are going, well, we don't need that. They need to all be sitting in the main service, which I personally don't agree with that. I think you need to, we educate at people's levels all through life. Why would you not do that in church as well? Are you
Absolutely.
seeing any of that tension? It's just as you work with churches, as far as really creating ministry to meet kids on their level.
Yeah, your assessment, excuse me, your assessment would be correct because there are a lot of churches that I've worked with that have said, well, we feel like the experience inside of the sanctuary is what they need because they need to know how church should go. And I cringe when I hear that.
Oh, it makes me. I felt something on the inside when you said that. I'm like,
I
oh Lord,
cringe when I hear that because here's the reality. Our children are not the future of the church. They are the present of the church.
absolutely, bro.
And we have to start building them to allow God to flow through them freely without the chains or the cell of tradition.
Mm.
That's what I was always afraid of. Not that all tradition is bad. I'm not
No,
saying,
there's some great traditions. There's some
yeah,
great ones.
absolutely. But here's what's so funny, Dale. We want them to be included in our worship service, but not our board meetings.
See, keep going there because you're onto something that I've been
Yeah,
talking about a lot lately.
we want to include them because we want them to get the church experience, but not when we're selecting a new pastor. No, that's when you can stay off you can go down to the children's area. When the committee meets to talk about strategic planning and building a brand new building, oh, we don't want any youth or young adults on the committee. So it's include them or don't. Like you want
And
them or you don't.
you are the first person I've heard articulate this. I'm just being honest with you because this is one of my big concerns. One of the things that has troubled me, and many of our podcast listeners are probably tired of hearing me talk about this, but I'm going to keep talking about it,
Sure.
is the fact that most churches don't have succession planning. Most churches, no matter what denomination, no matter what culture, there's no succession planning. I give you an example of a church here in our state that the pastor just retired. He'd been there for 45 years. And when he retired, they had to go get a search committee and start over. And I'm like, he's been there 45 years and he didn't raise anyone up to carry on afterwards. And so here's the thing, Tony Morgan did this thing called the life cycles of a church. It's a bell-shaped curve, and at the top of the curve is called sustained health. That's the place where you've got to intentionally begin to integrate and involve young people in all aspects of the church. If
Yeah.
you don't do that, you're not going to retain them because you just totally articulated. It's like, well, they don't. Their opinion doesn't matter on the important things. It's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And we've got to be more intentional about that, about raising up the next gen. And then this is another one you'll hear me say a lot. When I was a kid growing up, 90% of the people who gave their life to Jesus did it before their 18th birthday. And now I think it's like 95 to 98% before people turn 20. So if
Yeah.
you want to be evangelistic, if you want to reach lost people, there's got to be this bridge. Tell me how you guys are accomplishing this.
So, from a church perspective, our church perspective, I will tell you, you've struck a nerve because for me, one day I'm going to write a book about succession planning. I swear I am, Dale. One
Well,
of
I'm
these,
I'm working on one right now, so
okay, one of
we'll
these
tag
days,
team it.
yes, because here's the challenge. It's a shame that a healthy, whole church has to put itself in a spiritual hospital because we have people that aren't thinking proactively about what happens when I'm not there. I'll be honest with you, Dale. Our church, Greater Hope, has succession planning written in our bylaws. It is in there.
Tell us about that. What does
So
that
so
mean?
basically, when we were kind of looking through the bylaws, and I said, hey, listen, you all, if something were to happen to me, or I retire, and it may not be like a death or illness, but I
Mhm.
just say I retire after so many years, I just don't feel comfortable doing a search. Why waste money and resources? Love search committees, right? I mean, the firms that's their bread and butter. But
Mhm.
why do we need to waste our resources and our energy as a church on going to find a candidate when you have someone you trust in the position to guide you to find someone you can trust that
Mhm.
will be in the position when they're gone? There's a smooth transition. This is biblical. It's worked. It's worked in the ecumenical setting. So when you look at Moses and Joshua, when you look at Elijah and Elisha,
Mhm.
when you look at Paul and Timothy, these are perfect biblical examples of
Mhm.
what succession looked like. But when you really look at the example of Moses and Joshua, and most older ministers don't like to hear this, Moses died,
Mhm.
and God said, it's your turn. And
Mhm.
I've always thought to myself, I wonder what would have happened had Moses just went away, not died, but just
Sure.
retired.
Yeah.
And God said, I'm going to take you to this isolated island and you can live the rest of your life in peace. We'll never know. But my thing is, don't just die without a Joshua ready.
Mhm. That's
Because a lot of people also don't understand that, well, where did Joshua come from? Well, if you read the Bible in the book of Exodus, when Moses was up on the mountain communing with God,
Mhm.
Joshua was on the mountain too. He
Yeah.
was just at a distance, right? Watching, observing. So if you bring people in to watch, observe, listen, learn, get to know the people, it won't be that it would be a much better transition process than that of a search committee. If you look at Southeast Christian in Louisville, one of the largest churches in the
Mhm.
country, And Bob Russell pastored for 40 years,
Hmm.
passed it over to Dave Stone. Dave Stone became the senior pastor. Kyle Idleman, who was the youth pastor, became the executive pastor. Then Dave Stone retired. Nothing was wrong with him. He just wanted to spend time with his family. Dave
Hmm.
Stone retired. Kyle Idleman became the next pastor. So there were two successful transitions within the last 20 years.
I'm so glad you brought this up. Because here's here
So,
because I want to go one step further with your Moses
yeah.
example. One of the things about so Moses raised up Joshua. Joshua, the
Mhm.
Bible says that Moses would go in the tent and hang out with God, and when Moses would leave, Joshua would stay in there. So he
Yeah.
was trained, he was mentored. But one of the most disturbing passages to me is in the second chapter of Judges. It says that then there rose up a generation, which is Joshua's kids and all those people who win the promised land leaders, their kids who didn't know God and didn't know what he'd done. So
Mhm.
while Moses handed it off to Joshua, well, Joshua's generation, even when Joshua was challenging everybody and saying, "Hey, it's for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord," and we all have that up in our kitchens. But it's because he was being challenged by everybody because they weren't sure what they wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this thing of, I guess the church doesn't have a great history of passing it down and then passing it down again.
Yeah, no, they don't have a great history. And I'm gonna say this, and people may be offended, but I really don't care. Because I am an African American male. I have been in the black church all my life. Even in the black church, there has been it is you I can't find a really strong example of a clean succession plan in my experience in the African
Wow.
American church. I can't. Now I can be proven wrong. I
Well,
can be proven wrong.
there obviously can be out there because you don't
Yeah,
know everybody,
yeah,
but still the fact that you're in church, you've been in church, you're in leadership right now, which we'll get into that on the other side of the break.
yeah.
But just and for me, there's very few examples of any church of any culture that I can look to and say, man, there's a few, and there's a few more happening, but as a general rule, I think one of the scary things that happens is I see a lot of pastors hand it off to their kids, and their kids aren't called to do that. I was working with the church outside of Chicago a few years ago, and they had a pastor who was 72 years old. And I'm
Mm,
sitting there, and the pastor has two sons, and so his sons and their wives, and then a few other leaders in the church were at this vision day we're doing. And I just looked at the pastor at one point. I said, "Do you have a succession plan?" He's 72 years old. And he goes, "Yes, I do." I said, "Well, does anybody here know what it is?" He goes, "No, they don't." I said, "Well, can you tell us what the succession plan is?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to hand this off to one of my sons." Now, here's where the tension got. Only I would do this. Well, maybe not. I looked at each one of the sons, and let's just say one of them's name is John, and the other one's Mike. I looked at John and I said,
mm,
"John, do you feel called to pastor?" And he put his head down. He said, "No." And I looked at Mike. I said, "Mike, do you feel called to pastor?" And he put his head down. He said, "No." I said, so I look back at the senior pastor. I said, so you want to hand the ministry off to two men, one of two men who do not feel called to pastor. And what I went on to later to share with him was, listen, if he passes on and then the church fails, those guys, they didn't just let down God, they let down daddy. And that's a hard row to hoe, man. That's a
yeah,
difficult
yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Well, let's do this. I want to take a short break and we come back. I'm going to keep this thought, but then I want to also talk about some other things you're doing. So, short break. We'll be right back with JC. Back with JC, just enjoying this conversation. Oh, this is really good because you are just in the same vein and you're thinking of what I've been in looking at as I've worked with churches all across the country. And just the fact that succession planning doesn't seem to be a high priority because as you said, the young people are not the church of the future, they're the church of today.
Yeah.
And I don't think most churches have that philosophy. Is that what you've
No.
seen?
Yeah, I do see that. And I think we need to cultivate that philosophy. And so, and you asked a question earlier. And so, in our bylaws of our church, we have a full-fledged succession plan that is written out. It is detailed what happens when I announce my retirement, what happens with how we select a pastor, the church as a whole's involvement, the board of elders, which is our trustees,
Mm-hmm.
their involvement, what the timeline will look like. That person will come in. We'll do a half half, a 2 and 2 preaching split. We'll then
Mm-hmm.
do a 3 2 preaching split, then
Mhm.
we'll do a 1-3 preaching split, and I will slowly phase out. That person will come in, and that person will not come in as the pastor elect. They're going to come in as the executive pastor. They're going to come in as the teaching or preaching pastor and be under there for six months to a year, with the understanding, with a signed agreement from myself, that in that time I will transition out. See, the problem with a lot of succession plans,
I was going to go here.
the problem with a lot of succession plans is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And
Mhm.
people will say, I'm ready to retire. And you're the person, you're the guy, you're the gal, whatever the case may be. You're the person I want. And they
Mhm.
sit in the seat. So here's what happens. So for all of my senior pastors, as a senior pastor, I'm saying this with love. If you're not ready to go, be quiet. Because
Mhm.
what happens is you get a young budding minister who adores you,
Mhm.
who wants to sit under you
Mhm.
and sees the work that you do. And then you tell them you're it. I'm
Mhm.
going to tell you right now, whether you like it or not, they're going to be in the wings waiting. They're going to be on the bench like,
Well, they're
put me in,
supposed to be.
coach.
They're
Put
supposed to
me in,
be.
coach. And then when you do something that they wouldn't do if they were in your seat, they're going to start saying, well, Pastor, why did you do that? And why would, and you're going to be annoyed. So what I'm going to say to you is, if you're not ready to retire, you don't have a timeline, you don't
Mhm.
have a written contract, you haven't spoke to the trustees of the board, be quiet, because what you've done is you're going to create this division, dissension, and ultimately you may run that young person away.
Yep.
And this happened. I know of a young person, a young pastor, that this happened to, very close to this gentleman. He was under a pastor. The pastor had been sick for some time, was getting better, and actually called this young man from a church he was pastoring. He
Mm.
was he was born and raised in that church. The pastor licensed him, ordained him, married him, you name it.
Yep.
Went off, pastored a church. The pastor called him from his church he was pastoring and
Mm.
said, "Hey, listen, I need a successor. Why don't you come back home? You'll be an assistant pastor. I'll give you this title, and with the understanding that you'll be my successor." The guy left his church, Dale,
Mm.
came back home to his home church, sat under the pastor, and every time he said, "Hey, what's the timeline?" Year goes by. "Oh, we'll talk about that." A year and a half goes by. "Oh, I'm not quite there
Yeah,
yet."
you can't
Two
do
years go by, to the point
that.
where the relationship got so strained
Yeah,
that the young brother said, "You know what?
I'm moving
I'm
on.
I'm gonna move on. I've left my church to come here for you to kind of play games." And here's what happened, Dale. And I don't think this is I don't wish this on anyone, but I want you all to know the end of the story because this is important. The young pastor left and became a senior pastor at a church somewhere in the Midwest. I can't remember. And the pastor, his home church, the pastor got sick
Mm.
and got sicker, and he ended up dying.
Mm.
And they were without a pastor for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Got a pastor. That pastor stayed for 2 years, stepped down under duress. And
Hmm.
now they're without a pastor again, trying to find another pastor.
They had a plan, but he didn't move on it. I'm a big college football fan, and they don't do this anymore, but probably 10, 15 years ago, you used to hear of these situations where they called coaches in waiting. My
Mm,
example would be Jimbo Fisher when Bobby Bowden was at Florida State. And there was a few others that I know of where the next head coach has been handpicked, but then
mm,
this like they never handed it off, and it creates all this tension. And I think for lots of reasons, senior pastors don't know when to step away. I think what we wait till things are bad, when the reality is we should step away when things are good.
absolutely.
You know what? And when you step away, and as I was going to ask you this earlier, so when you finally do step down, are you going to stay at that church?
No, I
Good.
don't think it's healthy.
It's
I
not
don't.
healthy
I don't think it's
because
healthy
you're going to be at some. There's people you are going to be their pastors. They die.
forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, would I commit to giving to that church and tithing to that
Sure.
church and supporting that pastor? Absolutely. But as what I would consider, what we call at GHC, a virtual member. I would
Yeah.
be a virtual member.
Sure.
I'm not showing up to board meeting. Like honestly, and here's the thing. It's in the bylaws. It's in black and white, Dale,
Good.
that once I retire, I have to be gone for at least a year and a half.
Good. Good. I think that's
So
healthy.
no, I'm not showing up to any business meetings. I'm not doing anything. I would be willing to serve as an advisor to that senior pastor and that senior pastor only.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, I would not. I would not stay.
Well, this kind
Absolutely.
of leads us into really the very first conversation you and I had. I did a conference up in your area, and you and I
Yeah.
connected, and then we talked. And one of the things you reached out about, which I was honored that you'd even do this, was you talked about how that you had a group of pastors, younger pastors, that were looking for older mentors, and you couldn't find them
No.
because the older pastors wouldn't be honest and transparent about their mistakes.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. That's
You
fascinating to me.
know, one of the reasons why, and I thank you for that conversation because I'll be very transparent on this podcast. It was very lonely
Yes.
uh, in ministry, and coming from Louisville, where pastors of much larger churches than in Evansville, no disrespect,
Hmm.
but pastors, Kevin Cosby of St. Stephen's and Walter Malone Jr. of Canaan Christian Church and F. Bruce Williams from Bates Memorial, Bob Russell from Southeast Christian. These are pastors that have thousands of members, but
Hmm.
were never too busy to stop and have coffee with a young pastor. They
Mm.
were never too busy to take a young pastor to lunch. They were never too busy to say, hey, come get your feet wet over here for Youth Day or for this event. Stop by my office. Let's talk about an issue. Let's see if we can work it out together. And so coming into this area, I will say it is different, but I'll tell you why I think it's different now.
Okay.
But it was very hard to find senior leadership that would stop seeing you as competition
Mm.
and start seeing you as an opportunity to mentor and pour into.
Okay.
And I will tell you, this has been a legacy of this. One of my really good friends who pastors here in Evansville, and his name is Tim Simmons, and he is a phenomenal pastor, phenomenal pastor. Bread of Life is the name of the church here in Evansville. And he shared a story with me one time about his father. When his father was a young preacher, and his father, I think, is about 80 now, maybe when his father first started out preaching, and he went to some of the older preachers then and said, hey, where is it an opportunity where we can all fellowship together? And the response from the older pastor was, every fella has his own ship.
Oh. Okay.
And that has been the model for quite some time. And
Yeah.
so when I first started pastoring here, it was very similar. But you know what? I'll be very honest. Now that the church is growing, and I think now there are some people that say, "Oh, well, this young buck is really, really making a name for himself." Uh, Now we have room for conversation, and there are times where I think that's disingenuous,
Yeah.
but it has been very difficult to not have that space where we can lean on elders, particularly those who want to lean on the elders, not
Sure.
just be out here and do it on our own and, hey, I'm going to do it by myself. And I've seen that in many areas, not just church, but in many areas in our city. And it was very debilitating at one point in time, very debilitating, because while I could call someone else, it
Sure.
would have been nice to have had someone here.
I have found in my, because I've been doing, I've been in ministry for 40 plus years. There have been a pockets from here and there where I see churches where they have these ministerial groups, and the ones that seem to work are the ones where all of them come from different denominations. So a Baptist guy, Methodist guy, Presbyterian guy, the African American guy, just all these guys come together because they can't seem to get together in their own camp. And that
Yeah,
seems really odd to me that it's that way. Why would you think a leader would not be willing to pour into the next gen?
well, I think it's a number of reasons. I think it is sometimes, and maybe one day I'll experience this. Sometimes seeing a young lion makes you realize how much of an old lion you are.
Hmm.
And and sometimes that I think that can be intimidating. even though we don't mean it to be intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we come and we're like, hey, we're at your feet. Like, we want to know. And for some people, it's like, oh, they're going to steal my members, or oh, they're going to do this, or oh, if I tell them this, they might use it against me. Whereas they don't even realize we're going through some of the same stuff you went through when you were our age, and we're trying to figure a way out. So I think it may be ego. I think it may be a trust issue. And look, I'm not going to be that young guy, that young millennial preacher that, oh, the old generations, they're just against us. No, because I
No,
will tell you, there are some older pastors who have good hearts, and they've been burned by my generation.
sure.
Okay, so we got to talk about that too.
Mm-hmm.
That we have had some young preachers who have pretended to be a Jonathan and were really a Saul,
Mm-hmm.
and they have burned some of the older preachers and have come in and split the church and have come in and been divisive behind the pastor's back. So some of those preachers have every right to feel the way they feel.
Yep.
So I think it's just a number of things and a number of
I
reasons why that
think
happens.
for a lot of the older generation, this has changed a lot since COVID. But for a
Yeah,
lot of the older generation, there are pastors who have got trauma issues and they need counseling and they need to get help. And their generation didn't do that kind of stuff. And so, whenever you view the church as your church, you're in trouble because it's
yeah,
Jesus' church. And I remember hearing Andy Stanley say a long time ago that everybody in your church is going to leave one day. They're going to either move to another city, they're going to change churches, or they're going to die. But
yeah.
everybody's going to go eventually.
Life's gonna
And
go.
so when your mentality is, and I understand this because I pastored for 12 years, I understand this. When your people leave it hurts. There's no way that a family, especially when they go to another church in town, it
Yeah,
is if they have enough integrity to even tell you they're leaving. Sometimes they won't even tell you. It hurts, and you take it personally, and you're like, "What did I do wrong?" But at some point, we have got to get to the place where we go, "Wait a minute, this is not my church. This is Jesus' church." And the reality is we need to be able to help raise up and hand off and empower and train the next gen,
yeah.
so they don't go through some of the same things we've been through.
I
So
agree.
you are now working with the Center for Congregations.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier. Tell me specifically what you're doing there.
So if I could break it down into three bullet points, the first thing that we do is grant acquisition. So
Mhm.
let's say Dale Sellers comes and says, "Hey, I want to bring Dale Sellers and company into my church to do a training on leadership,
Mhm.
or a training on succession planning, or a training on mental health and the importance of counseling for pastors. And we don't have the money in our budget. Can we get this grant for the center?" The Center for Congregations offers those grants.
Mhm.
We offer grants for a number of things. There's a number of things we don't offer grants
I
for.
want to say this on the podcast. This is
Yeah.
specifically for churches in Indiana.
Indiana, yes.
Yes.
And I know there have been a lot of churches that have been like, oh, can we do it here in
Yeah,
Michigan? I'm
bring it to South
like,
Carolina,
no.
please.
I know. But yeah, no, it's specific to churches only in Indiana,
Yes. Hmm.
every part of Indiana. And so, when you think of strategic planning, when you think of sending your pastor and your leadership to conferences to get training, we grant a number of things. And our grants are up to a $25,000 matching grant. So it's 50-50. The center pays half and the church pays the other half. We also have grants which we call special grant initiatives, the mental health grant, that resources go to a project in mental health within the church and the community. And so that would be the first thing that we do. The second thing that I do is I do education and professional development. So I bring people like Dale. I bring people like Building God's Way Company. I bring people that are professionals in the field from a number of topics on succession, professional development, bivocational ministry. We've had one recently on care in the church, conflict in the church, immigration in the church, and we bring those trainings for free to our congregations. Now, that is open to anybody in the United States, including our podcast. So you do not have to be an Indiana church to get that education. You only have to be an Indiana church to receive a grant. But anybody can listen to our podcast. Anybody can go on our website and sign up for an education event live online.
Hmm.
We have people from Kentucky come to visit our what we call our brick and mortar. That is our in-person trainings as well. We've done one on AI in ministry, a number of topics. And you can go to the centerforcongregations.org and look at some of those topics and some of the upcoming training, ministry and money, two fish and five loaves, how to be generous and build an endowment in a church, just a number of topics. So we
Hmm.
do education. And then finally, the third thing we do is resource consulting. So Dale comes to our church and says, hey, JC, I don't want a grant. And I don't need education. What I need is a company that will not charge me an arm and a leg to put a new roof on our church. Then we go through our database and say, hey, here's a company that many of our churches have used and they recommended highly. Use them. We'll also give them a call, let them know that we know you, let them know that you're on a fixed budget, and please take it easy on you. So,
Yeah.
so we do a number of those things for our churches.
Everybody listening right now is going, I wish I was in Indiana.
Yes,
And most churches are familiar with, I mean, the Eli Lilly grant. They put out a few grants nationally over the last few years, but I remember a couple of years ago there was this big push, and I think they gave out like 70 or 80 of those, but there was like several hundred people who applied for them, and it
absolutely.
is not a simple process. I'll tell
It
you
is
that
not
much.
at all. It is not at all. And the beauty of the grants through the Center for Congregations is it is a 12-month renewable grant.
Hmm.
So you could actually say, okay, you know what? We want to go to this conference on strategic planning and succession planning. And we could send you up to $25,000, you and your team, to this conference in California or South Carolina or wherever.
Hmm.
And you are giving us reports throughout your grant. And let's say you get the grant today, April 2nd, right? Then April 2nd of 2026, your final report will be due. So May of 2026, you can apply for another grant. And that grant may be, okay, now we need to bring someone in to help us write the succession plan and to
Hmm.
get the timeline together. And you can get eligible for that as well. And it keeps renewing as long as you're doing what you need to do.
I'm just really thankful that you guys have that program there. I've been able to come a couple of times and work with the center. Did soul care events there last year,
Mhm.
and I met you even before that.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, you didn't come to my soul care events because you were just being celebrated somewhere. If I remember that, I think
That
that
is
was how that went. I thought I'd make sure I mentioned that on the podcast.
that actually was correct. I
You
was
did not show up,
honored.
and
I did not show up. I was being honored, and I didn't think the honoree should miss. So yes, I
yeah,
did
the
miss.
timing
I'm
was
so sorry.
terrible. Well,
Yes, it
as
was.
you think about what you're seeing, what gives you hope for the future of the church? Just the church overall, specifically maybe in America. What's got you excited?
There's a couple of things that have me excited. The number of young people that are now giving their life to Christ and joining churches
Mhm.
at pretty increasing intervals. The number of young families that are coming back to the church, even here in the city of Evansville and in other places. And I'm hearing this from my other colleagues across the country.
Hmm.
The climate that we're in now, and that sounds really funny to say that. So no matter, and I'm being apolitical, no matter
Hmm.
what spectrum you're on, the
Sure.
climate that we're in now as a country is really forcing people to reevaluate the significance of spirituality of church and the relationship with Christ. Doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, doesn't
Hmm.
matter. Black, white, male, female, trans, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Everyone is starting to really process and be intentional about processing. Okay, what does life look like spiritually for me? And then just the urgency of churches realizing we got to do something different. One of the topics that I want to bring towards to our audience soon, Dale, is church mergers and
Hmm.
church closings.
Absolutely.
Because there are a lot of churches that are in buildings that are costing them thousands of dollars a month with 10 people
Yep. All across the country.
all across the country. So
Thousands, not hundreds, thousands.
thousands of dollars. So my question then becomes, okay, what does it look like for a number of churches to come together and say, listen, we're going to be the pastoral staff. We're going to come together and we're going to minister to our congregations. You bring your 10, I bring my 20, you bring your 50, and we're going to create a unified ministry. That's easier said than
I
done.
was going to say, you figured that one out. I want to have you back on the podcast.
Yes, and I think it can work. I think it can work, but there's one thing that must be eliminated before it can work. Ego. That's it. I'm telling you, if you
Like I
get rid of that
said,
ego, Dale,
when you figure that one out, you can give me a call back. We'll have you on because I want to hear the magic bullet for that one.
well, you know what? I'm gonna figure it out. I'm eventually gonna figure this out because I'm here to tell you it could work. I believe if I'm very straightforward and I don't mean to be, but I feel like
Yeah,
if
you
people
do.
Yeah, I know. If people would just say, Dale, you're the better pastor. Uh, and John, you're the better preacher.
Yeah.
And I'm the better administrator. People are leaving my church because I just don't know how to execute the word of God like you do. So maybe we need to come together. Let me administrate. You're going to check on the people and visit the people because you're not a people person, Dale. But Dale, what you really are is a great preacher. So Dale's going to preach on Sundays. John, you're going to visit the people, the sick, and you're going to be over the deacons. And I'm going to make sure the finances are taken care of and the reports are done.
I hope you can figure this one out.
I hope I can too.
Because one of the things that's coming into play is the baby boomers are aging out. I talk about this a lot now, and they've been your givers, attenders, and your servers. And honestly, they're the group that Barner labeled as the duns. They didn't come back as in grows after the pandemic. But as pastors get older, one of the dynamics that's happened in the American church is many pastors opted out of Social Security. As a pastor, when you're young, you have the opportunity to opt out of Social Security. Many pastors did, and they have no retirement.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them are holding on. They would love to retire. They would love to step away, but the church is the only source of income. And so this is definitely an issue that we're going to have to figure out as we move forward as well. Because even if they did go, you know what, I love JC's idea, and I would love to do that. I still got to pay the bills. Some of them don't even have a home because they lived in parsonages all their lives.
Yeah.
And so these are just some dynamics we've got to have some real honest conversations about to solve these problems. Before I let you go, so you tell me what you're excited about. What scares you the most for the future of the American church?
What scares me the most of the future? Social media.
Oh, you got to explain that.
So for me, social media has been the church's best friend and worst enemy. And I feel like the sacredness of the space of worship can be contaminated by the need for social media. Because now anybody can take their phone out and record the pastor saying something stupid, or anyone can take their phone out and record what was supposed to be a sacred moment is now being made fun of all across social media. The newest thing now is Brother Marvin Sapp was requesting people to give a certain amount of money, and now that's gone viral, and people are like, "Oh, that's all the church is about," And so for me, I think, not saying that you should do this when the cameras aren't on,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is, for me, we have become so over sensationalized. And going back to Exodus chapter 40, the Bible says that when the tent of meetings was completed, the Lord filled the tent, and he filled it so that Moses could not come in. And that when he moved, the people moved. When God stood still, the people stood still. I feel like, Dale, my concern now is we're filling the temple with everything but his presence.
Oh, I'm with you.
You got the lights, you got the sound, you got the audio visual, you got the camera following the pastor out of his limousine and into his office. What's up, everybody? It's Pastor JC. How y'all doing? We're at it at another service. This is my first service out of 5 today. Beautiful. Love it. But are we taking the focus from the real celebrity, which is Christ Jesus, and putting it on? Like I told my church one time, because we're a young church, we're a social media church. I said, hey guys, cut the live off when I do the call to worship or the call to discipleship. I don't want the world seeing someone vulnerable right now.
Yes.
They have enough eyes on them in the sanctuary. I don't need thousands of more people saying, oh, look at her and her mascara's running, or, oh, look at them, he's taking his time. No, that's a sacred moment. So you'll watch all of our lives, and our lives cut off when I say the doors of the church are open. That is the cue for everyone in our audiovisual team. We cut the live, because there still should be some sacredness in the sanctuary. And so for me, I truly believe that the fanfare, the celebrity, the social media, the TikTokiness of our churches, I'm not saying don't use it, but we got to be careful. That's what I'm most afraid of, because people now can get out there and say, Ruth and Naomi were in a lesbian relationship. Woo, oh yeah, that's provocative. I love it, right? Jonathan and David were homosexual together. Yeah, that's what listen. And we put this stuff out there, and we had, like you said, we've got young people joining the church who may have struggles with different lifestyles, different backgrounds, and different mentalities and identities. And they hear these things and they're like, yeah, let me go to that church. But what substance? What depth? So there's a correlation here. If you know there's a lot of young people that are giving their life to Christ by the age of 20, and you want young people, are you really doing what thus saith the Lord, or are you gimmicky? Are you just putting out gimmicks?
You can't sustain it.
People, but can't sustain it.
You can't
because
sustain it.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, what every person needs is a life-altering experience with the Master.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what we saw in biblical times.
Yeah.
They didn't just meet him and it's like, oh, I met Jesus today.
Yeah.
No, it was come see a man
they were transformed.
that told me everything about myself.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I know you don't like this Jesus. I don't know why you don't like this Jesus. I don't know all the political stuff, but I'm gonna tell you one thing. I once was blind and now I can see.
Are you starting to preach here?
Transformative ministry. I know, I'm sorry. I need to stop. We need transformative ministry.
Well,
if we can do that with social media, then I'll be good. But I'm afraid we're running into trouble. But
we're rolling out a new conference here that's coming out in the next few weeks at 95 Network, and it's how to cultivate a healthy, thriving church. Mm-hmm. And one of the pillars, we do some pillars at the front of it, and one of the fifth pillar is just being committed to an awareness of the Holy Spirit's presence and obeying what the Holy Spirit tells you to do, because as you said, a lot of us we're void of that. We've chosen hype over the presence of God. Yes. And as I said, you can't sustain hype. Man, we could talk for hours.
Yes, we could. I thank you, Dale.
I appreciate you so much for taking the time to be on here. I'll put on links in here of on the show notes of how to get in touch with you or just to follow what you're doing. But man, thank you for taking the time to join me. I'm so thankful that the Lord is using you guys and you're having such an impact there in Evansville, Indiana.
Thank you so much. It is my high honor, and I appreciate all the great work you do. I thank you for pouring into me in a season where I needed it the most. And so anytime you need me, I'm available.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.